Welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz, mama, journalist, coach, and founder of Mama Rising. This podcast is a space of community and collaboration. We gather stories of matrescence, motherhood, womanhood, and change told by our Mama Rising coaches and mothers around the globe, in the knowing that through our stories, we can begin to heal and change the way the world sees, values, and supports mothers everywhere. So, welcome to the Happy Mama Movement.
Welcome back, everybody. Today on the podcast, we're talking about self-compassion. When I reflect on my own experiences of motherhood, self-compassion has been and still is the hardest part. Forgiving myself in those moments where I'm not the mother that I want to be, allowing myself to make mistakes, being kind to myself when one of my children are struggling, all of these things have been the hardest. And one of the things that I find quite frustrating in the self-help world is that we talk a lot about self-compassion, but when it's almost impossible to access that self-compassion, we don't know what to do. As you'll hear in this interview that I'm about to share with you, I reflect on the frustration of knowing I should be kinder to myself and wanting to be kinder to myself through all these years of motherhood, and yet many years ago not knowing how to actually do that. Today I'm interviewing Belinda Haan. She is a mindfulness teacher here in Australia, and as an ambassador of compassion with Stanford University, she founded the Compassion Project, an initiative delivering practical research-based tools to reduce suffering as women and as mothers and really cultivate this compassion that we should have for ourselves. And I know we all want, but in an actual, real, research-based way. I know that you're going to get so much out of this episode, and please, as always, let both Belinda and I know your biggest takeaways from it. Enjoy. Belinda, welcome to the podcast. You have been on my radar for many, many years, so it's great that we're finally connecting and sharing our knowledge together, so thank you.
Thank you. It's a real honour, and yeah, as I mentioned before, I've been following your work for a long time, so it is a privilege to finally meet you.
Well, we're kind of the OG of these conversations in a way. Your kids are 14 and 12 and similar to my ages of my children. And I know that the work you do now has really evolved over your own 14 years of motherhood, in particular around self-compassion, which is what I really want to speak to you about today. But as always, I think it's best, especially for the new mamas that are listening, for us to go back to what the experience of becoming a mother was like for you.
Yes, wow. Yeah, it was a long time ago, but I remember I was one of the first in my friendship group to have babies. And so I really modelled motherhood off the Huggies ad, which was really unrealistic, I realised. And I think because I just had this idea that I was going to be a natural, and I really found that not to be true, and I found it so difficult, and I found it so difficult not to be fully capable from the first day.
Yes.
And it was just so hard to be in that beginner's journey in a role that I've never wanted to be better at in my life, and that never felt more important. So it just brought up all of my perfectionism, all of my self-doubt, all of my self-criticism, and really, quite often took me away from the present moment and just into shame and just feeling like I was failing all the time. And I went to mother's group, and my shame just deepened because there was not real conversations about the transition into motherhood. It was all about who's breastfeeding, how often are you doing it, whose child's sleeping through the night, and all that sort of thing. And so I just felt this more and more isolation from myself, from other mothers, and I was just exhausting myself trying so hard to be the best mother ever.
Yeah.
And and I think from the moment I became a mother, my heart just burst open. And at the same time, it was like the shame that I had in my body and my mind just grew and grew and grew as I just didn't feel like I was a very good mother. And I remember when the kids both have had different times of suffering, I've really in those moments blamed myself. I didn't play with them enough. I didn't give them enough attention, enough hugs, and enough love, or I was too cranky, and all of those sort of things. So whenever they had a difficult moment, I just went into shame. This is my fault. And, quite often I used to walk around thinking, if only everyone knew what a bad mother I am. And I really did feel like that. And, that was really hard. And I think it was really like that until my daughter turned 10. And I think that was a real turning point where I just could see her clearly and see what an amazing child she was. And I could finally see that I had contributed to that in some ways. I mean, she was innately amazing, but I also did provide a lot of that love and nurturing environment. So I could kind of see myself in a clearer way, I guess. And I really realized that my biggest regret as a mother was actually how I treated myself.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for being so vulnerable and honest about that. I think this shame that we carry inside of ourselves when we assume, like you said, that we're meant to nail this from day one. But also
Yes.
in particular, whenever any of our kids go through a hard time for some reason, we immediately feel that it is our responsibility that they're struggling, that it's something that we have done that has got them into this hard place. Nobody really
Yes.
talks about that very much.
I mean, in those moments of difficulty where we can see that they need us because they're suffering, and yet we're just completely overtaken by shame and self-criticism, which takes us away from the present moment. And then we have this meta judge that's like noticing that we're not present with them in their suffering and everything. It can really cause just so much pain and hardship for the mother. And it's just so natural for our children to have moments of suffering, and that's actually part of their resilience building and everything as well. So if we always couple their suffering with it being our fault, then it just really does take the joy and the presence out of motherhood.
Mm-hmm. It's a hard lesson to learn, though, isn't it? That
Yeah.
they are on their own path. Their
Yes.
struggles are there to teach them something, that there is this letting go of the massive sense of protection and responsibility we have for them as they grow. Just recently, I did a beautiful interview with a friend of mine, Amy Malloy, who's just written a book called Wise Child. And we had a huge conversation around this as well. If you haven't listened to that episode, everybody go back and listen to that one. And in that, we were talking again about this struggle we have in knowing that their little soul, depending on how spiritual you are, has its own path. And
Yes.
we are we're a bit of a doula on that path. We may hand bottles of water as they're climbing it, but it's not our path to climb. But I love the way that you've added to this part of the conversation that the shame and the sense of struggle that we have through that as mothers can really be not only pull us out of those present moments with our kids, but can really turn quite nasty towards ourselves and quite hard at quite difficult times.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And just sort of pulling the thread of the podcast that you were just mentioning, from a spiritual perspective, a lot of people say our children choose us, their souls choose
Mm-hmm.
us. And that's been a lot of comfort for me actually over my motherhood journey, that they've chosen me, and I'm going to provide, the lessons and the love and the container for them.
Yeah. So how did you begin to turn that inner dialogue around? I call it the inner mean mama. What was the path
Yeah.
for you to start to change that?
Yeah, well, it was kind of a bit of a unusual path because I was running mothers groups, and so I was, the mothers groups that I ran, which was in direct response to my own mothers group experience, was you can't talk about the baby; it's only about your experience, and really sort of opening up that honest conversation. And so I was teaching them how important self-compassion is, and all of that, and then going home and just fully beating myself up for any tiny little mistake. And so I'm like, come on, it might be time for me to really sort of look into how do I embody this for myself, because at a deep level I somehow thought that I didn't deserve it. So then I did a 1 year program at Stanford University, called the Applied Compassion Program. And I did that for two reasons. One, I wanted to finally embody self-compassion. Can I please have this miracle cure that everyone talks about? And also I wanted to, one of the parts of that program is to do a community initiative that alleviates suffering. And we could choose the community, and I chose mothers. And so that program really helped me to marinate in compassion and compassion practices. And it helped me to really see that self-compassion is something that we can learn. And it also, I think from my own personal experience and also talking to mothers, that self-compassion can be an intellectual idea that we all believe is a great idea, but there can be a massive gap between knowing self-compassion is a good idea and actually embodying it. And so through that year, I was just starting to notice the barriers to self-compassion within myself and through conversations with other mothers. And one of the barriers to self-compassion can be, firstly, not even knowing that you're suffering. So you have to know that there's something wrong for you to be able to access compassion. And often mothers are so busy doing life that we don't even really acknowledge what is happening for us because we're so busy caregiving and putting our attention externally. And then, one of the barriers as well that can happen with self-compassion is that maybe our nervous system is in a threat response. So if we're in a threat response, it's hard, if not impossible, to access compassion. So if we're feeling triggered by something, or we're feeling angry or whatever, it is hard to access the part of our brain that we need to access where compassion naturally arises. So in that year, back to your question about how I embodied self-compassion, I was practicing it and building it through practice, but also uncovering the barriers that were existing within me to being able to access compassion. And I would say one of my biggest barriers that I've had, Kristen Neff talks about self-compassion being mindfulness, warmth and kindness, and common humanity. And if we've got really intense self-criticism, I joke that I've got a PhD in self-criticism, then it's really hard, because when we're in that self-criticism, it brings us into that threat response as well. And that's like a kind of no-go zone on being able to access compassion. So I've just been unpicking, the barriers and looking at ways and alternatives to being able to access self-compassion, even when you don't feel like you deserve it, because
Yeah.
often we don't feel like we deserve it. So I've sort of got multiple ways now that I access self-compassion, and self-compassion can look very different. Like self-compassion can be allowing myself to be in resistance, or even allowing myself to notice, oh, self-criticism's here. Like it can be quite nuanced in how we practice it.
Oh, there's so much in there that I want to ask you about. First, let's reflect on that nervous system threat response.
Yes.
Most of early motherhood, if not the full experience of motherhood, can have you in that fight or flight. There's always 7 steps ahead going in your head. Something happens, someone falls over, there's a phone call from the school. That, like, our nervous systems are so heightened through so much of this experience. So when you say it's almost impossible to access self-compassion when we're in that threat response, oh, if only I'd known that 17 years ago, Belinda, because I remember starting, if you've read my book or been around here for a while, you'll know that my biggest struggle was the way I talked and treated myself when I became a mother. And I started doing, the Louise Hay affirmations every day. And I would push my baby around the suburb, around the neighborhood, and I would try and repeat to myself, I love myself, I love myself, I'm a great mother, I'm a great mother. And it was actually worse because I knew I was lying to myself. It made zero difference. And in a way, it kind of almost heightened that negative voice in my head. No, you don't. You're a shit mum. This is what you're doing. It was almost worse. So when I now hear something like, my nervous system was so bad in those days because she didn't sleep and it was new motherhood. If only we could tell mothers that when they're in that full fight or flight and absolutely exhausted, accessing this beautiful, kind voice is hard, if not impossible, then maybe the warmth and kindness towards ourselves would start. Is that how we can do it when we're in that place?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, thank you so much for sharing that story. It resonates with me a lot. And I think that what Kristen Neff and Chris Germer talk about is that when we are in that threat response, this is how it can be. So if we're in fight response, then self-criticism is like extra. And when we're in flight response, we withdraw from others. And when we're in freeze, we shut down in hopelessness and despair. So, all of those gives me goosebumps because I know that experience, and it's so hard and so painful. And trying to convince ourselves to be self-compassionate, I've found with myself and also with others, is when people say you need to be more self-compassioned, it's like it can trigger shame. Like,
exactly. It's like I'm failing at that too. Oh,
great. Like, how screwed up am I if I can't even be bloody self-compassionate? Like, it seems so obvious. There's all this research to support it. Like, why can't I do it? Okay, well, it actually can be really, really tricky and nuanced.
And also in those moments, I would have loved to have been able to be kind to myself. Like,
of
please
course.
tell me how to feel better about myself. But you can't access that. So
No.
what do we do? Yes, please, Belinda.
Well, yeah. And I think that for me personally, going into thought-based self-compassion, like, I'm a good mom, I'm trying my best. That doesn't work for me in those heightened states. So we try other things, and what works for me one day doesn't work for the next. So one of the most powerful things that works for me is just to even put my hand on my heart, just close my eyes and say, this is so hard. Like, just saying that is such an acknowledgement. It's such a validation. And I've got goosebumps. It's like,
me too.
It's just so simple and so sweet. And that just can just change everything, because in that moment, by saying this is so hard, we're acknowledging the realness of this moment. And we're just, by putting our hands on our heart, is a tender gesture towards our body. And so, things like that can be really helpful. Doing breathing exercises can be really helpful. So basically, anything that can help our nervous system to feel safe,
right.
We can sort of do some dancing or, just things like that to just get us back into that regulated state. And then maybe we can access the more thought-based self-compassion, or we can, one of the things about self-compassion is taking action towards what would support us, so then we can go, okay, well, what's like one little thing that I need to do to make today better? But yeah, there's just so many different strategies that we can access. So if the strategy that you're trying to access self-compassion and it's not working, or worse, it's invoking shame, then just try something else. Even going for a walk or calling your
Yeah.
bestie.
Yeah.
Like that, even actually watching a funny show on TV. Like there's no sort of, I'm like, let's not have a dogmatic approach to self-compassion, because sometimes, like, if we're like having a serious grief moment, we wake up and we're so sad, like, what's some tender things we can do? We can make a cup of tea and sit out on the grass. We can watch, our favorite show. We can call a bestie. Like, it doesn't have to be some prescribed thing. Like, we can try
Yes.
what's a tender thing. We could, what if we're feeling like, when you feel like you really need to cry, but you're sort of blocked, watch The Notebook or something like that just helps you to sort of release those tears, because that's really what's wanting to be met.
I love that. I think we so often think, as you said, is self-compassion is this thought-based prescription, and actually, like you. I think the way that I finally began to do it was very much around the physical embodiment.
Mm.
I would literally hold my own hand. Still gives
Yes.
me an
Mm.
emotional feeling doing that, because it brings back those times, because it was just so lonely and so hard and so
Yes.
scary. And so just like, come on, Amy, just talking to myself a little bit like that was a turning point. So I have another scenario to reflect on with you.
Yes.
I've been coaching and supporting mamas for over 10 years around what I call the inner mean mama, and this kindness and self-compassion that we need to give to ourselves. One of the things I often hear, Belinda, is that we can be quite attached to our inner criticism, thinking that it is the thing that is keeping us productive. It is the thing that is making us try harder. Sometimes I've heard women say, but if I let go of that voice that is telling me I should do better, I should do better, I should have got up earlier, I should be more organized, then am I just going to become lazy? Am I just
Yes.
going to give up on my standards? I like my high standards, Amy. I want to be the best I can. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because it has often come up as the challenge, or as you would say, one of the barriers to fully start being compassionate towards yourself.
Yes, I get it too, because I remember when the whole good enough mother came out, I was like, what do you mean?
I don't want to be a good enough mother.
That sounds like a low bar. And so
Love that.
I totally get that, because I've been very devoted to, like, trying to be the best at everything, but
Mm-hmm.
no more than being a mother. And then I guess I would just encourage people who are experiencing that, just to sort of be curious. What would it be like to have a day where you're not so being punished and driven so hard by this little voice, mean voice in your head, that's telling you to do stuff? Because what you might notice, what they might notice, is that when that voice is smaller and less loud, the volume's turned down, I guess, it allows space for presence. It allows space for clarity, and it allows, like, that values connection of, like, well, what is most important to me, and how do I be present in this moment, as opposed to being like having this, because the inner critic really is old news. It's
Mm-hmm.
operating off old news. It's from when you're a child, and it was a beautiful and benevolent protector that helped keep us safe when we were younger. But it often doesn't really, like, it's not really in the current age that we're at, and yet it sometimes can really take us over. And when we notice more experiences of that volume being turned down, or noticing the inner critic and saying, I see you, I see how you're trying to protect me, do you think that you could just maybe just turn your volume down a little bit? If you think that I'm doing the wrong thing, feel free to turn it up again. But could I just have a moment, to see what happens? And I think what happens then is that we have access to our true self. And, because that's the inner critic is a protector, a benevolent protector, but an old news kind of protector. But we've got so much wisdom and so much clarity and everything that exists without that critic. And so with that volume turned down, we can access our true nature and our intuition, and we know what to do. We don't actually need to be driven so hard and in such punishing circumstances, which is really the opposite of ever being happy or joyful or whatever. That's my experience anyway.
No, I love that. And it makes me think of, when we speak to our children, we would never just constantly criticize them. We would never say, oh my God, you've done it again. You've done, try harder. What are you doing? We know through the way that we raise our children that compassion and patience and loving reassurance is the way for them to thrive. And yet we don't do it to ourselves.
Exactly. I mean, how motivational is it to just go, you're so rubbish, why can't you just do better? I mean, we're not feeling super pumped to,
Exactly.
to be able to, yeah, exactly. So I mean, really at the heart of it, self-compassion is a reparenting journey. It's really about, noticing the ways that internally our little children are suffering, or, inner child suffering, and how can we, just like the beautiful mothers we are nurturing our children, can we nurture ourselves, or just start to just experiment with what it's like to turn towards ourselves with that level of patience and understanding that we would with our children.
Wow. With your work at Stanford University and everything you do now, do you think that we're getting better as a world in learning compassion, and especially for this beautiful next generation that's coming through? I fluctuate between being deeply worried about the world that they're inheriting, and then also thinking, I think that they're going to shake this up and do this very, very differently.
Yes.
What's your reflections on the world that we live in and the role of compassion and where we're heading?
Yes. Well, I mean, I just went and saw the Scene documentary. I don't know whether you've had a chance to see
Yes.
that yet. Yeah, which was
Yep.
amazing. And, I've been reflecting on how our generation of parents have kind of got the raw end of the deal in a way, because we're healing from our early experiences, and we're kind of in many ways the early generations of doing that, being having the capacity and resources and everything else to be able to do that. And at the same time, we've got all this wonderful information about how to be a really great parent. And then we're sitting in that dissonance between how we want to be and the aspirational, and the fact that we've got nervous systems that need a lot of support, and we're still learning how to be compassionate with ourselves and that sort of thing. But I would say, we're doing a really good job, because these kids, they are so the ones that I have exposure to, they're just so inspirational, and so they just blow my mind with their levels of confidence and their curiosity and their strength. They're just amazing. So I think that we can micro down to, oh, we said that wrong thing, or we got cranky and we said that, whatever. We can go into that fine micro assessment of how we're doing as a mother, or we can just take a zoom back and go, wow, we're really doing well here. And yes, we mess up, but everyone messes up, and that's one of the big things about self-compassion, is if we can zoom out and realize that we are not alone. One of the best things about motherhood is that it connects us. It connects us to each other. As soon as you meet a mother, their experience. It's very heart opening. And so, if we can't access self-compassion for ourselves, we can just say, just like me, there are other mothers today who feel totally overwhelmed, feel like they're failing, that sort of thing, so that we can remind ourselves that this is not a solo experience. This is a shared experience.
Oh, I love that.
Be so hard,
Yeah, I love that. There is another mother who is struggling with the same thing as me right now. That's
Yes,
such a beautiful thought, because it is often the shame comes because you think you're the only one, because it's silent and
exactly.
it's hidden and it's invisible. And I totally agree. I think this next generation, obviously, there are still a lot of things that they're struggling with, but I see the way that, again, the ones that I'm exposed to and the world that I live in, I see their deep compassion for difference that used to be not there. Like that, my all three of my kids actually will fight fiercely with anyone who judges one of their friends or one of their siblings. Like, no, you don't do that. They've got this real fierce desire for everybody to feel accepted, everybody to feel like their place in the world is honored. So I do think that it's hopeful. I wish that we taught compassion and self-compassion in schools a little bit more, but that's what the mums are
Yes.
doing. That's what we're
Yes,
doing.
exactly. Exactly. That's right. That's right. And
Yeah.
and even just us being honest about our own journeys with self-compassion, that
Mm.
it's sometimes just not easy.
Yeah.
That helps with the children when they can't access it as well.
For sure. It's so incredibly important. I often say on this podcast, I wonder what it would have been like if I'd known this stuff 17 years ago. But I also know that my journey to try and stop treating myself the way I did has led me here. And I know it's the same for you, Belinda. So
Absolutely.
thank you for
Yes.
creating your amazing compassion toolkit, which we'll put all the details in the show notes for mums to have a look at and how to reach out to you. And thank you for sharing your story and really tangible ways that we can start accessing this for ourselves.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, as always, for being a part of our global matrescence community. Please take a moment and make sure you're subscribed to this podcast in your podcast player so you can always be notified of our next episode. And if you would like to work with a coach on your own experience of matrescence, please go to mamarising.net and explore our directory of phenomenal coaches, workshop leaders, space holders and facilitators around the globe. You can also explore our Global Matrescence Foundation and consider donating so a mama in need can access the support of one of our coaches and still ensure that our coaches receive the income and support they need so they can continue to work in this way. And finally, if you would like to be a coach, a facilitator, and a matrescence activist in your own community, jump on our waitlist for our next intake of the Mama Rising Facilitator training at mamarising.net. Thank you for being here and being part of this movement. Until next week, bye.